Well, this is outdated. So, in the early 2000s, I grew up without internet, basically. It wasn't until about 2015 or so that I finally got access to the internet and I was able to, check out a lot of information about Godzilla. Before that, it would usually be at a friend's house. I believe when Final Wars was coming out, one of my friend's dads showed me the Godzilla Final Wars website, and that's when we discovered that a ton of Godzilla monsters were going to be in that movie. It was going to be the Swan Song, the 50th anniversary and stuff. So when it came for us and a lot of the Godzilla movies that my dad never knew about growing up, and later on in the 90s and the 80s, this was one of the ways that we discovered a lot of those movies. Now, this is probably very outdated at the time. It's published in 1998, and this basically goes over everything Godzilla related up to that point. So, for example, there's a lot of really, really cool pages in here, but this one goes over all the posters, for example, from the original 1954 Godzilla movie to Godzilla Raids Again, all through the Showa era. And then finally it starts with the Heisei era, and that's where it ends. It ends on Godzilla versus Destroyer. So see, that's the next page. But what was so cool about this was we didn't really know at the time a lot of these Godzilla movies. So for example, we knew of Godzilla versus Biollante because I believe my dad went into a store to buy Godzilla in 1985, and that's when he walked out with Godzilla vs. Biollante being the very next tape next to it. But we didn't know about such ones as Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, Godzilla vs. Mothra, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. There's just... Why is there two images for Mechagodzilla 2? Oh, I guess they have the A and the B poster, but that's kind of weird that they have both of those posters, same thing for Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, and yet they don't have the A and B poster for any of the other ones. That's weird. But it would be really cool. I would be at a young age. I remember I'd always rent this from the library before I bought it for myself, and this was one way that I discovered a lot of the information about Godzilla. So for example, it just goes over a lot of the history of the movies. So for example, here you get the full synopsis of how there's both a Japanese edition and an American edition. I didn't really know that at the time of a young age until I would read this book, for example. But it was always cool because there was a lot of different pictures, a lot of different information about how they made the movie, how they brought it over to America. There would also be these weird pages by science fiction authors or even historians or scientists, and they would kind of tie Godzilla to real life events, or just saying like how if you like Godzilla, you're smarter than the average bear. But for example, right here with Godzilla Raids Again, you have how there's the Japanese title, the English translation, the original release date and running time, all of the credits, how it's changed to Gigantus the Fire Monster in United States, how it was double billed with teenagers from outer space. I think that this book is really, really cool. It's just a shame because it's definitely outdated just due to the fact that this doesn't go beyond Godzilla versus Destroyer. But it is super cool how it goes over the different suits. It goes over a lot of different things, like how there's symbolism in Godzilla movies and how certain directors were using them as allegories for the current times. Just how they made the movies. This was always super cool for a kid that loved Godzilla, that didn't have access to the internet, couldn't watch a lot of what other people were thinking about Godzilla movies or getting other people's opinions on it. So this book was always really, really cool to me. One of my favorite pages in this book is right here, where it shows the height difference and with a ton of different monsters at the time. So for example, you have the Showa version of Gigan, the Showa version of Rodan, and the Showa version of Anguirus. But then you have something like the Heisei era of Godzilla, which towers over those versions of those creatures. But then you have something like the Heisei era version of King Ghidorah. Just kind of weird like this, little weird oddities. This was also another one of my favorite pages where you would be able to see some of the Godzilla comics. And I remember I would look at this book, then go to my library and ask them to hold one of these because they would have these in compilation novels where they would put them all together. So I would rent those out. Same thing for these chapter books. I have a few of these, like Godzilla at World's End, Godzilla Returns, Godzilla on Monster Island I have as well. So I would try to use this book to collect them all. And I guess we can use this format as another opportunity to go maybe into those chapter books a little bit. I can bring those on. But this was just always really, really, really cool in my opinion. You know, just how right here you would have profiles on all the monsters and, you know, their different abilities. Same thing for right here. You would have diagrams for all of the monsters as well. Now, sometimes they don't go too in depth, like here for Baragon, but then they do so for Biollante and Batra with his different forms, Gigan, Ebera, Gabara, Destroyer, and then this was super cool as well, how it had the different Godzillas during the period of time, and you could all see how they evolved at the time. You know, there's those pictures nowadays where people line up the different Godzillas, or even those videos where people compare the different sizes of the Godzillas. This was always super cool because this was like the first to do it. I remember too, I would use these pictures as references to draw these different monsters. So for example, me and my dad, we would have drawing nights, and I would bust this book out if I had it rented out at the time. And I remember one night specifically, we tried to draw a little Godzilla because he's always been my favorite. I always think, you know, little Godzilla, he's cute as can be. So we tried to draw him one night. This was always super cool too because they would also compare the weight of the different monsters or the height of the different monsters, and it would really show just how tall each one was. Now at the time, I mean, I knew who was heavier and I mean who's taller just because you can use Godzilla as a reference in the movies. But, you know, it's always super cool to compare someone like Mogira to Mecha King Ghidorah, or Biollante to Mecha King Ghidorah, Biollante to Space Godzilla, or Destroyer, just people that never really showed up in each other's movies. So I always thought that, you know, this was just a super, super cool book. For Godzilla fans nowadays, I mean, the internet is chocked full of Godzilla information. There's more videos out there about Godzilla. I believe there's books out there too, like there's one that has a Shin Godzilla cover on it, and that's kind of the Godzilla history. But if you're a collector out there and you want something that kind of has this look into Godzilla's history, but this is from '98, but it's something that I'll definitely treasure. You know, it's something that I always rented out. We drew with it. We used it as reference to rent out or buy the other Godzilla movies that me or my dad had never heard of before, like Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah and the Godzilla vs. Mothra double pack. We discovered that later down the road because of this book. Just, you know, a lot of great memories with it.